Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's dive into this. Because today, we're going to unravel what is frankly the biggest lie you were ever taught about how you learn. For decades, this one specific idea has just been completely hardwired into our classrooms, our corporate training programs, and honestly, our own personal beliefs about our brain power. We're going to completely dismantle the learning styles myth and dig into the fascinating, real science that lies beyond it.
Think back for a second. At some point in your life, maybe it was in middle school, maybe a corporate team building seminar, or, just scrolling the internet late at night, you've almost certainly taken one of those universal personality quizzes. The ones that ask, are you a visual, auditory, or kinesthetic learner? And after tallying up your answers, you were handed one of these three distinct labels. The famous VAK model told you that you were primarily a visual learner, an auditory learner, or a kinesthetic learner. And honestly, it probably felt incredibly validating, right? We use these exact categories all the time to justify why we might be struggling with a certain subject. How often have you heard someone say, yeah, I just can't learn from a traditional lecture, I'm a hands-on learner? We literally wear these labels like a badge to explain away our educational hurdles.
But here is the wild, almost unbelievable part. As deeply ingrained as this idea is in our global culture, it is completely made up. Seriously, it's a total fabrication. Cognitive psychologists have rigorously tested this concept over and over and over again, and the scientific consensus is crystal clear. The idea that we have distinct, hardwired learning styles that dictate how we best process information is an absolute myth. Part 1. The origin of the myth and how the vague industry took over. Let's move to and see how this builds. So how exactly did an idea with absolutely zero scientific backing become undisputed gospel in schools and workplaces literally around the world? Well, in the 1970s, the VAK model gained massive initial popularity. And the reason why is simple. It just sounds intuitively right. It feels accurate. And more importantly, it offers a really comforting explanation for why we might struggle to grasp something difficult. By the 1980s, this comforting idea had exploded into a massive, highly lucrative industry. We're talking schools and corporations dropping untold millions on specialized educational assessments, custom curricula, huge consulting fees, the whole shebang. But reality finally hit in 2008. An exhaustive review commissioned by the Association for Psychological Science looked at all the available data and completely debunked the entire model. To understand exactly why it got debunked so hard, we need to draw a very clear line in the sand between two concepts. There is a massive distinction between a preference and a processing requirement. Now, to be clear, we absolutely do have preferences. You might strongly prefer watching a quick YouTube video over reading a dense, dry instruction manual. That's a preference, and it's perfectly normal. But, and this is key, a preference is not the same thing as a cognitive processing requirement. Just because you prefer visual formats doesn't mean your brain actually requires a visual format to successfully extract meaning and learn a new concept.
Part 2. The scientific reality, and what decades of research actually show.
Let's look at the hard data from that 2008 comprehensive review to see what decades of rigorous psychological research actually tell us about the human brain. For a long time, researchers dedicated their entire careers to proving something called the meshing hypothesis. Essentially, this is the idea that matching instruction to a student's preferred learning style actively improves their learning outcomes. This was the core promise of the whole VAK industry. The thought was, if we teach a visual learner using heavily visual tools, their test scores should absolutely skyrocket compared to other methods. But when researchers actually combed through the data, they found absolutely zero evidence for this. The hypothesis failed completely.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what they found. When tested strictly on visual material, self-proclaimed visual learners score a 50, and self-proclaimed auditory learners also score a 50. When put to the actual test, visual learners simply do not perform any better than auditory learners on the exact same visual tasks. The numbers just don't back it up.
The reason for this failed test comes down to how our brains physically function. We learn by extracting meaning, not by storing audio or video files. Human brains are not biological hard drives. When you listen to a podcast or a story, you aren't recording the exact audio frequencies of the speaker's voice to replay later on like a tape recorder. No, you are extracting the narrative, the concepts, the underlying meaning of what they're saying. Information is stored conceptually in your brain, not as pure sensory input.
Part 3. The danger of labels and the collateral damage of VAK. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is understanding why holding on to this myth is not just harmless fun, but actively damaging.
So you might be wondering, why not just let people believe in their learning styles if it makes them feel confident? Well, because holding onto this myth is actively holding people back. Believing you are exclusively one type of learner creates a false biological excuse to give up when learning gets difficult. It breeds a fixed mindset. Just imagine a student who decides early on that they're purely a kinesthetic learner. What happens when they're faced with a challenging 50-page reading assignment? They might mentally check out completely, genuinely believing their brain just isn't wired for reading. We're inadvertently handing people a biological excuse to quit rather than encouraging them to push through that cognitive friction.
Part 4. The real solution. Match the subject, not the student. So the crucial point is introducing the actual science of learning and reconstructing a better reality for all of us here.
How do we fix this? How should we approach education, training, and self-improvement if learning styles aren't the answer? The actionable takeaway from all of this scientific research is perfectly summarized in just one concept: match the modality to the content. The absolute most effective way to learn isn't to desperately try and figure out a student's supposed internal learning style. It's to tailor the teaching approach to what the subject itself inherently demands. To really ground this abstract science in reality, just look at how certain subjects absolutely demand specific learning modalities for everyone, regardless of personality. If you're learning geography, the best modality for every single human being is visual. I mean, you absolutely must look at a map to understand where borders lie, right? What about mastering a foreign language accent? The best modality there is clearly auditory. You literally have to hear native speakers to mimic their inflection. And what if you're trying to learn how to hatch a quail egg? That is entirely kinesthetic. You need hands-on practice to safely manage the physical incubator temperature and humidity. The subject dictates the style, not the student. This leaves us with an incredibly empowering message about the human brain, which actually operates as this amazing multimodal engine. First off, you are not limited to one channel. You do not have to put yourself in a restrictive little box anymore. Second, your brain is an incredibly adaptable, resilient machine. And finally, the ultimate strategy for mastering difficult material is to attack subjects using multiple senses. The best way to learn isn't to lean heavily into one single style, but to combine reading, listening, watching, and doing, all at the same time.
Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. Now that your multimodal engine is unlocked, how will you tackle your next learning challenge? It is time to completely abandon the old VAC labels that have been limiting you. Stop telling yourself you can't learn from a book or a lecture or a hands-on task. Your brain is a powerful tool, perfectly capable of extracting meaning from all of them. Embrace the content, choose the best modality for the job, and start truly learning. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack this topic, and I'll catch you next time.